This video is sponsored by Proton Pass. Big tech, it's everywhere, from watching YouTube shorts to calling your parents. But who owns these tech companies dominating our lives? In China, it's Weibo and Tencent. In America, it's Meta and Google. And in Europe, it's Meta and Google. Not very European. Actually, can you even name one major tech company from Europe? We asked our EUMS team internally, and we could only come up with one, maybe two. Can you beat that? Comment below. Anyway, how bad is this problem? And can Europe build its own tech giants? First, let's have a look at the numbers. Over 90% of the search engine market in Europe is controlled by American companies. Google alone dominates this space. European companies hold less than 2% of total market share, with small players like Ecosia, a Berlin-based search engine that uses profits to plant trees. When it comes to cloud infrastructure, it's a similar story. Every time you stream a YouTube video, scroll Instagram, or load a website, that comes from massive data centers and cloud servers. But those servers are not European. Roughly 70% of internet traffic in Europe flows through infrastructure controlled by American tech giants, like Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and others. European companies hold just 15% of market share, led by German SAP, Deutsche Telekom, and French OVH Cloud. And social media? It's almost entirely non-European, dominated by around 75% by the US, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X. And the rest, mainly by China, TikTok. Here, Europe really struggles, with less than 1% market share, with niche platforms like Mastodon from Germany and Vero from the UK. But they're barely visible next to the global giants. And then there's the big fancy new thing, AI, especially large language models. And by now you can probably guess the trend. The US dominates, with ChatGPT, Gemini, and Microsoft Copilot holding over 93% of the European market. The EU does have a few homegrown contenders though, most notably Mistral, a French-developed LLM. But right now, less than 1% of Europeans actually use it. So while it's promising, it's still far from being a serious competitor. And then there's hardware to actually run these AI models on. The high-end chips that power everything from ChatGPT to self-driving cars. And when it actually comes to manufacturing these chips, there are only 3 players in the world operating at the cutting edge. TSMC in Taiwan, Samsung in South Korea, and Intel in the US. Nothing in the EU. Europe doesn't have a single facility capable of producing chips at the 5 nanometer level or beyond. And when it comes to chip design, it's the same story again. No European companies, and dominated by US companies like Nvidia and AMD. But here's where Europe does quietly dominate. The world's most advanced chips cannot be made without EUV machines, and the only companies that make them, ASML, from the Netherlands. These machines print circuits just a few atoms wide. So while Europe doesn't make the chips, it builds the machines that makes them. And without ASML, the AI race would simply not happen. So that is an overview. And with the exception of ASML, the status quo is not looking that good for Europe. But we are good at something. Great even. And it's putting big tech under pressure. No, it's not a new innovative EU company, but rather EU regulation. It started in 2018 with GDPR, the famous data protection law. Companies must get clear user consent for their data, or face fines of up to 4% of global revenue. Then, in 2024, came the Digital Markets Act, aimed at powerful digital platforms. It bans unfair practices like favoring their own services, and requires them to open up to competitors. Alongside that came the Digital Services Act, focusing on platform responsibility, tackling illegal content, algorithm transparency, and disinformation. And in 2025, the EU is introducing the world's first AI Act. It will strictly regulate high-risk AI and bans practices like biometric surveillance, putting ethics ahead of profits. So yes, Europe is doing a lot to protect its citizens from big tech overreach. But let's be honest here, your data and privacy are still far from safe, especially when things like this happen. If you run a business with multiple team members or volunteers, like I do, you'll know that password chaos is almost inevitable. Logins get lost, passwords get versioned, and someone's always stuck clicking the forgot password button. Or worse, passwords are shared in spreadsheets, notes, or chat threads anyone can access. But it's not just annoying, it's dangerous. A single password breach could expose sensitive accounts, client data, or internal tools. And for small businesses, that kind of incident could be devastating. And that's where Proton Pass comes in. It's a secure encrypted password manager built in Europe. And as a European channel, I always keep an eye out for smart European alternatives to big tech. For teams, it's not just safe. It's incredibly practical. You can share entire vaults or individual items with just a few clicks. Access can be temporary or permanent, and you can revoke it at any time. Ideal when onboarding or offboarding team members, or working with freelancers and external partners. You can also define company-wide policies for password strength, two-factor authentication, data sharing, and export, helping your team stay efficient without compromising security. Proton is trusted by over 50,000 organizations, and it's a simple way to protect your workflows while staying productive. So, use my link, proton.me/EUMS, and get it for just €4.49 per month. A smart, secure investment. Now, back to the video. So these are the main regulations the EU has implemented against big tech. But how did Europe even get to this point, where it's regulating big tech instead of leading it? Well, we see four main reasons behind that shift, and the first, ironically, is regulation itself. While rules like the GDPR were meant to rein in big tech, there's growing evidence they've hurt smaller European companies even more. One study found that after GDPR came into force, profits at large IT firms fell by 4.6%. But for small firms, they dropped by over 12%. Why? Because big tech already has the resources, tech teams, and legal firepower to adapt. If you're Meta or Google, hiring 100 privacy lawyers is just routine. But for smaller European startups, you're drowning in compliance costs before you even get to compete. And it's not just the rules. The perception of heavy regulation is damaging too. Europe's reputation for strict laws often scares off entrepreneurs and investors before ideas even start. Startups, wary of red tape and slow compliance, either shrink their ambitions or leave Europe altogether. Next, there's the structure of the European market. Europe is fragmented with different languages, laws, taxes, and consumer habits, making it much harder for startups to scale. There's no European Silicon Valley. Cities like Berlin and Paris have growing scenes, sure, but no single hub with the talent, capital, and momentum of California. As a result, Europe sees a massive brain drain. Since 2019, tech migration is up by 15%, with better pay and opportunities drawing top talent to the US. And it's not just people. Companies leave too. With stronger IPOs and buyout options, many European founders either sell early or move their startups to the US. And then there's the money. One of the biggest reasons Europe fell behind is financial, and it's just as critical as structure. Let's start with venture capital. The US has long had deep, mature venture capital markets, especially for late-stage funding. In 2024 alone, US startups raised $139 billion, nearly 3 times the amount raised in Europe, which landed somewhere between $45 and $52 billion. That kind of capital makes a huge difference. And then there's also public investment. Much of America's early tech success came from government backing through agencies like DARPA and NASA. Europe never built a similar large-scale engine for innovation. The fourth reason Europe fell behind is cultural, and it's just as important. Europe tends to be more risk-averse. Failure is often seen as something shameful or personal. Over 50% of Europeans associate business failure with shame, compared to just 27% in the US. In the US, failing at a startup can be a badge of honor, a sign that you tried, learned, and are ready to try again. In Europe, it can feel like proof you weren't cut out for it. So what's the EU and Europe doing to catch up? Quite a lot, actually. First, on regulation. The EU is finally trying to make things easier. New omnibus packages aim to simplify rules like GDPR for smaller firms. And there's talk of easing the upcoming AI Act to avoid crushing startups with compliance. And then there's finance. The EU is pouring billions into startups through initiatives like Choose Europe and the Scale Up Europe Fund, aiming to grow more European unicorns and keep them here. And there's also the EU Chips Act, a €43 billion plan to boost Europe's semiconductor industry by funding research, chip design, and new factories. Its goal is to double Europe's global chip production share from 10% to 20% by 2030. The EU is also trying to tackle structural issues with the long-awaited Capital Markets Union. The plan is to unify Europe's fragmented financial systems so companies can raise money across borders as easily as in the US. And to shift startup culture, programs like Project Europe offer funding and mentorship to help young founders build the next global giants from Europe for Europe. These measures will already help Europe start catching up with non-European tech powers. But there are also a lot of private industry initiatives pushing in the same direction. Take Eurostack, an initiative to build a fully European digital ecosystem from cloud to AI to hardware, based on open standards and digital sovereignty. Or Gaia X, which brings together companies and governments to create a federated cloud infrastructure that gives users control over where their data is stored and how it's used. Now, there's so much talk about these, and each of these sectors could have its very own video, so comment if you're interested. Here's my opinion. We can build our own tech giants, but a lot needs to happen, and fast. First, we really need to deregulate, or at least make it easier for companies to comply with existing rules. In my previous job at a software company, our clients literally spent millions of euros on our software to comply with laws like GDPR or the DSA. And while bigger companies have the funds to do this, smaller ones don't. But most importantly, we need to tear down the barriers that still exist between our markets. If Europe is serious about competing with the US and China, we simply can't afford 27 fragmented capital markets. It's time to finally build a fully integrated capital markets union, one that gives European companies the financing they need to grow, right here in Europe. We actually made a whole video about it here if you want to find out more about how this will supercharge the EU's economy. And we also have a video coming on the severe consequences Europe would face if it loses the AI race. So subscribe if you're interested. And make sure you check out Proton Pass to protect your business privacy and passwords. You can use my link, proton.me/EUMS, and get it 35% off, meaning just €4.49 per month. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to our presidents, Jan Schauke Christian Peter AGVD, Daniel Unite Europe, Stefan Mr. Probot, and Rashid. See you in the next video.